Hello, my name is Neil Morgan. I'm your York County Administrator. Joining me today are our two Deputy County Administrators, Vivian McGettigan and Mark Carter. The Capital Improvement Plan is a major activity of county government. Mark, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this portion. You have recently led a process, a committee to review our Capital Improvement Plan and make recommendations for the future. Would you talk a little bit about the process, but why don't you start with, what is a capital improvement plan?
Okay. Well, a capital improvement plan or program is a multi-year program or guide to spending money to address the county's infrastructure needs, building needs, equipment needs, things like, do we need new roofs on buildings? Do we need new parking lots? Do we need to have those parking lots repaired? Do we need new school buses or various types of other equipment? York's capital improvement program is a 10-year plan. The first year, so far, right? And many localities have a shorter time frame. Right. Some have 5, 6 years, whatever. The first year of the plan represents the financial commitments that are made in the adopted budget. Okay. So it's the money that's actually going to be spent on those capital facility needs or capital equipment needs. The out years, or the years 2 through 10 in our case, represent a plan, a way of trying to identify and show a general dollar amount for what they may cost, and also a sequence of when they may need to be actually accomplished.
So the further out in time that goes, the more of a sort of an educated guess it is. The closer in to the next operating budget, the sort of more real it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so for the homeowners, a capital item might be you need a new roof on your house, or you need a new furnace. In terms of county facilities, it's much greater magnitude, but in general, we're looking at projects that have a useful life of multiple years and generally have a dollar amount of about $50,000 or more.
So to use the household budget analogy again, the county's capital improvement program is a plan to buy, replace, repair things that have a multi-year life, the kind of things that you wouldn't typically pay for out of your annual budget because the life of the expenditure goes on for many years. In some cases, 30 years, 40 years, exactly. In some cases maybe 5 to 10.
Correct, right.
Well, why don't you share with the viewers some of the more significant items that are in the capital plan that you've been working on leading us with?
Well, first, if I could, I'll say a word about the process that we used this year that actually you recommended and instituted. It's a new way of reviewing our CIP, or our capital project needs. We brought together all the various departments and offices that are responsible for the various functional areas in the county, whether it's public works or schools or utilities or infrastructure, IT needs, those sorts of things. And they had already submitted their requests to the budget staff. The budget staff racked all those things up in terms of a nice spreadsheet to show everybody what the dollar amounts were and what years they had been proposed. And we brought those people together, and they were each responsible for explaining their projects. And obviously everybody feels like their project is the highest priority in the world, but the benefit of that committee discussion was that everybody learned a little bit more about each other's projects. Everybody learned that their project was not necessarily the highest priority, and they learned why. They learned why, for example, we need certain things at certain times, and why certain other things can be deferred because of either lack of funding or because they're just not as high a priority as some other project. In terms of specific projects...
So excuse me on that. So since I'm the one that will have to ultimately sort of put my name on the document and say, Board of Supervisors, citizens, this is what I recommend, the advantage of that kind of process is all of our senior staff people kind of get to hear it, and when I have to make cuts that make people displeased, at least maybe everybody kind of has heard the same thing and kind of understands why some things have to take priority over others.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what's going on.
That's right. And the committee talked about things in terms of whether it's a legal requirement that the project be done. For example, sooner or later we're going to need to replace some fuel tanks that run the risk of leaking, and that's a liability issue to the
Absolutely.
county and a legal issue if it does happen. Then they're the nice to have kind of things that we'd really like to do, but we just can't afford to do. And so we also looked at whether projects are in consistency with the comprehensive plan. We looked at whether there's a capacity issue that needs to be solved, or whether there's a public safety issue or a health matter that needs to be solved.
Or in some cases, if you build it, you actually increase your operating expenditure because it requires more people. In other cases, if you build it, it might decrease your operating expenditure because the facility would be more efficient than an old one, those types of things.
Absolutely, that's right.
So talk to us about some of the particulars.
So the particulars, highest on the list is the Grafton Fire Station replacement. That's a project that's been underway for the past couple of years. The county actually purchased the land for that new fire station that needs to be relocated. For one, because of the Route 17 widening project that's going to impact the operational needs of that station, and also the building has just reached its maximum useful life. So there's a new station site that's been purchased on Dare Road at the intersection of North Constitution Drive. And so now the next step in the process is to fund the actual construction of the building. And so that's one of the things that we programmed into the CIP.
And that, I think we'll probably all agree that that'll be a high priority on the county side, certainly.
Yes. From the standpoint of a health and safety kind of an issue, the Carver Gardens water system replacement is high on the list. That's a project to replace an aging, privately owned water system that serves about half of the Carver Gardens neighborhood. The pipes are prone to leaking. They are have diminished capacity because they've rusted shut in many cases.
And in this case, we can combine it with a sewer project that we needed to do anyway, so we can kind of tear everything up once and modernize the under the street infrastructure.
Correct, and that's one of the projects that can be funded with a combination of what we call enterprise funds, which are the funds that are generated by the user fees that people pay for their sewer systems, or their trash, for example, is also another enterprise fund. But what's been recommended is to pay for that Carver Gardens system with about half general fund money and about half enterprise fund money. Another thing that's high on the list will be fire and rescue apparatus replacement. Those types of vehicles and apparatus have a limited useful life. They're
not cheap.
They're not cheap. They're monitored very closely as far as the hours that they run. One of the things that people look at as well and say, that vehicle doesn't have many miles on it, but what happens?
It sits there and idles.
It sits there and idles, exactly, when they respond. So they keep good track of the hours of operation. Another project is to purchase a generator for use at one of the county's emergency shelters. So God forbid we have a hurricane, we need a generator capacity at those shelters to house the people who might be displaced in a major storm event.
And that's certainly a priority for me when I make my recommendations. Emergency-related things have to be high on the list.
We have information technology needs. We have
Vivian was waiting for you to mention that.
We have an infrastructure management system that needs to be replaced. That's a major upgrade that keeps track of all the various sewer pipes and valves and whatnot that are monitored by our utilities department or division. We also have a financial management system and information technology need.
And if I could just say, to citizens, when you think about the capital improvement plan, it's probably a lot easier to understand a school or a fire station, but we have to also be concerned about these technology infrastructure items. We have a 30-year-old financial accounting system that's going to take probably about 3 years to design and procure and install, and that's a big deal, and it has to be done. But you, as a citizen looking in, don't really see that. It's kind of like a sewer line under the road. You don't really see it, but somebody's got to worry about it.
Right.
What about on the school side?
On the school side, well, two things on the school side. During the recessionary times and the post-recession, there was a lot of deferred maintenance. Both the county and the school system are facing that.
And they've got more buildings, more roofs, more windows, more air
Exactly.
conditioners than the county.
So there's pent-up demand for those maintenance things that are not cheap. A roof is a very expensive thing. An HVAC system for a school is a very
Right.
expensive thing. On the county side, we have the same sort of needs, although diminished, or not of
Same
that
scale.
magnitude, right? And then the big thing from the school system standpoint is a new elementary school to deal with the capacity issues that are facing the Yorktown and Magruder attendance zones. And the school division and the county are currently engaged in discussions about where can we place where can we find a new site for an elementary school, and when does it need to be programmed in terms of not only land acquisition but also building construction. So that's a big ticket item.
For sure, and I think it's fair to say both on the county and the school system side, we're committed to move that project forward. And as an order of magnitude, we're talking about a $25 billion project,
Right.
so 4 times as expensive as a fire station.
Right.
Which kind of brings me to a good segue. Vivian, let you get in just a little bit on this capital improvement plan discussion. It's kind of hard to explain. It's kind of hard to understand, frankly, but there's a relationship between the capital improvement plan and the operating budget. Now, Mark mentioned the first year of the plan, typically we appropriate as an actual expenditure plan as sort of a supplement to the operating budget. And that's kind of a number and a list of things, and everybody can understand that. But the harder part is as you spend money for these long-term projects, it generates an expenditure in the operating budget. Could you just try to talk as simply as possible about how that works?
Okay. There are basically 2 impacts. As you mentioned, you have to pay for those capital projects. And the funding source for that really will come from the operating fund in one of 2 ways, either by way of cash financing it or by looking at debt service. The second impact is the operational expense, as Mark had mentioned. Sometimes you build a building and you will have some costs associated with that. So I'd like to just break that into 2 pieces for just a second. When we look at the capital projects, and in talking about the school will have a long-term life. It will benefit future taxpayers as well as the current taxpayers. It is the ideal candidate for a project that you would debt finance.
Pay for over time.
Yes, because you need the cash now to build that building, but because that one is partially driven by increases in student population, by debt financing that over, and typically we finance those over 20 years, then you're matching better that expense related to that school with those who benefit in the future.
So the people who will use it
Yes.
will pay for it.
And I'll talk about the operating expense on that one, and then I'll switch over and talk a little bit about the fire station. So as far as the schools go, when we build a new school, there's staff associated with that. There are utilities, there's maintenance costs associated with that building, and that will hit the school's operating fund, and the county will fund a portion of that by way of transfers in the future. But as we look at staffing a school, you'll have a new principal, a new vice principal,
More teachers.
librarian. Some teachers will be new, and some will reallocate as
Right.
along with the students. But over time, the expectation is as that student population grows, you do have, you build up to what that total.
So the schools will
capacity
need money
is.
to operate the school.
Yes, they absolutely will. To contrast that a little bit with the fire station, we have an existing fire station now, and so the staff that will move, we'll have staff that will move from that fire station over, because one will essentially close, and the staff and the equipment will move over to that station.
So it won't necessarily directly impact the operating budget from a standpoint of people.
Yes, that's also, the fire station is also another good example of a project that you would typically debt finance. It is a structure, it's a building, 20 years, it's certainly going to live a life
Right.
expected to live more than 20 years. So that project we would look at debt financing as well. Then you may look at some other capital projects. There is a fair amount of cash funding that goes into the CIP each year. We have a history of doing that.
But of course, that's just like a family budget. You have a certain amount of savings, and you got to be careful that you don't use all your savings for that, because you need to keep some. The state calls it a rainy day fund. You need to keep some for unanticipated emergencies. If you could, I know this is a little arcane for folks, but also talk about how debt service impacts the operating budget, because the reality is sometimes you need to borrow money for like a school or a fire station, and you borrow, for every $1 million you borrow and pay back over 20 years, in the next operating budget you have to come up with something like 100,000. And so to some degree when Mark and his committee say, here's the CIP we recommend, and we say, yeah, we need this, this could probably wait, this has got to move forward, how do we juggle all this around? And it's really hard to be precise about it, but we know that the more of that there is, the more it goes into the operating budget.
Well, we actually have a model that does look at what is the debt service that we're currently committed to and how does that pay off over the long term. Over in the model that we're using now, we're using 6 years, and then an example that goes out to 10. But as you had mentioned a moment ago, as we think through the capital projects we have, for every 10 million, you can generally assume there's about $1 million of debt service that'll go in if you finance it over 20 years. To pull a little bit on the house, the home mortgage, and just look at some components on that, when you are potentially buying your first home, you're looking at your budget at that point, and you're looking at that. What will that mortgage payment do? So this is similar to a mortgage payment when you do a capital financing piece. But then, as we talked about the roofs, not everybody has the money to replace a roof or overhaul their HVAC system. You would also look at, if you financed that, what would the impact be of those? And there are some, as we look at the CIP, not all of those will we finance over 20 years. And when you look at painting your home, often that's out of current dollars and not financed. So we try to look at a couple of issues. One is, who are the people who are the taxpayers that should pay it? So in the example of the school, again, that one is
period of time.
is a longer stretch. If you're just painting a school or painting one of our office buildings, maybe our office buildings
Should
are probably
come out
a
of the
better
operating
example.
budget.
We have operating money associated with that.
So knowing that we need to also talk about the process coming up in the budget and this running a little bit long, I guess the fundamental point there is that the capital budget has a lot of very urgently needed long-term projects, and we somehow have to narrow that list down and figure out its impact on the operating budget, because to some degree it directly competes with other things in the operating budget, like salaries or computer replacement or anything else that you would typically have in the operating budget. Well, I think we've covered this topic with some thoroughness. On the screen as this show ends is the information about how to contact the county, the staff, as well as the Board of Supervisors. We encourage you to monitor the process as we proceed to conclude a successful budget process in the spring of 2016. Thanks for your interest, and have a good day.